Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from an unapologetically leftist perspective. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington, a distant northwestern outpost of southeastern Indiana's gerrymandered 9th Congressional District. For 17 terms from the 1960s through the 1990s, the 9th was admirably represented by stalwart Democrat Lee Hamilton. During Hamilton's decades in Congress, Bloomington was drawn into a southwestern Indiana district with Evansville, called the Bloody Eighth, for its reputation as a swing district known for close races and frequent turnover. Still, former B-Town Democratic Mayor Frank McCloskey represented the area side by side with Hamilton for 6 terms. After the Hoosier state lost a seat to redistricting following the 2000 census, a 9th district that now included Bloomington was still relatively capably represented by Blue Dog Democrat Barron Hill for 5 non-consecutive terms, but, as we've spoken about repeatedly in this space, the Red Wave Tea Party election of 2010 and subsequent gerrymandering on steroids undertaken by Republicans in state houses across the country, including Indiana, drastically reshaped the political terrain in ways we're still just beginning to comprehend. Since then, the 9th has been shaped into a consistently red district with a Cook political rating of R+16. Representatives have included now Senator Todd Young for 3 terms, Tennessee millionaire Nepo baby carpetbagger Trey Hollingsworth for 3, and now Salem's Erin Houchin for 2. I would nickname her the Salem Witch, but will refrain out of respect to both actual witches and victims of the Salem, Massachusetts violent religious frenzy of 1692. Anyway, Democrats have been running uphill for a decade and a half at this point, unable to overcome the myriad built-in advantages Republicans enjoy. In 2024, Dr. Tim Peck, who we hosted on this program and in the spirit of full disclosure is the co-founder of Project Next Media, which hosts my Sunday morning program. We have no financial arrangements. Anyway, Dr. Tim ran a hell of a campaign, yet still fell short by over 30 points. With the experience of one campaign under his belt, Dr. Peck is giving it another go in 2026, but he is not the only Democrat in the race. Brad Meyer is a 7th-generation Hoosier born in Indianapolis, raised in Brownsburg, and educated at Purdue. He spent a 35-year career in business and technology, 20 of those leading manufacturing teams in small-town southern Indiana. He spent the last 9 years as a U.S. Navy civilian engineer working on incoming missile and drone defense, leaving the Navy just months before early retirement to run for Congress because he couldn't just, in his own words, keep his head down and shut up. Meyer is my guest today, and in the following conversation, we'll discuss his motivation for making such a life-altering decision, how he intends to overcome the built-in Republican advantage in our district, and what's wrong with the Democratic brand. We'll talk about the dying American dream and how Democrats can't be afraid to go big once in power because that's what it'll take to restore the social contract. Real quick, before we get to the interview, do please consider supporting Who's Left with a paid subscription. This is an independent media project, I don't paywall content, and I don't rely on advertising. Only individuals like you keep this thing going. I refuse to gatekeep valuable information in the middle of a political crisis, even to my financial detriment, so please, if you find value in this work, go to whosleft.us and subscribe at the paid level. It's only $5 a month or $50 a year to help me write more, research more, and organize more. Not ready for long-term commitment? You can make a one-time contribution on Cash App or Venmo. Links are in the show notes. Me and my old body would like to spend less time on construction and more time constructing a better future for Indiana, but I need your financial support to do so. If that doesn't work for your budget at this time, that's okay. You can still help out by liking and sharing on social media, commenting, leaving reviews, providing feedback, and forwarding articles to your people. We are building a community of Hoosiers dedicated to making this state and its government work for all of us, not just the elite few. Please join us. Follow on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads at whosleft.us, and on Facebook, X, TikTok, Mastodon, and YouTube at Who's Left. Tell the others. Let's build a radically democratic Indiana together. Thanks again. Now, here is my conversation with Brad Meyer. Brad Meyer, welcome to the Who's Left podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me.
I really appreciate you being here this morning. Morning for me, anyway. Maybe not for our listeners. But why don't you introduce yourself to the folks out there listening or watching, if they are.
Okay. So I'm Brad Meyer. I'm running for the U.S. House of Representatives in the 9th District. Am seventh generation Hoosier, born and raised in Indiana, raised my family here. Got a master's degree in electrical engineering from Purdue University, spent 20 years in leadership roles in manufacturing, and spent the last 9 years of my career as a civilian Navy employee, as a subject matter expert in electromagnetic warfare, and worked on systems that protected ships and sailors from missile attack.
Oh, neat stuff. Way above anything I can begin to comprehend, I imagine. Yeah. So, smart guy, sounds like.
I'll leave that to others to say.
So listen, what makes you decide to jump into a congressional race at this point?
So the long version of the story, and you maybe you can edit this down for brevity, is that I worked for the Navy during Trump's first term, and he was he had enough trouble keeping things moving that he was an annoyance, but not a real threat to democracy. And the second time when he won, I went to my wife and I said, I've got 7 years until I can retire. I just need to keep my head down and do my job and keep my mouth shut. And she's like, okay. And then when he actually came to office, like the first day, the craziness started, right? And he started dividing us and implementing things. And I went back to my wife and said, okay, I've got a year before I can take early retirement. I just have to keep my head down and keep my mouth shut and do my job. And I was dedicated to my job. The work I was doing was important and it had value. And then a couple months later, I went to her and said, I've got to quit and I have to run for office. He's crossed a red line. And she said, well, what happened? And I said, well, he fired the board of the Kennedy Center. And she kind of looked at me like I had a horn growing out of my head. And but I explained that when people in power start specifying what is acceptable expression, whether it's in the arts or a newspaper or in the bedroom, we are in serious danger. And everything that has happened since that time, I knew was going to happen when he fired the board of the Kennedy Center.
That's an interesting red line, and not one I've heard before from people. But I guess everybody's got their own sort of interpretation of when it becomes too much for them. And for you, that was what said, yeah, this guy's not going to stop. He's going to pull over everything.
Right. And I should mention, and I usually don't tell that story now because there's been so many crazy things that's happened since then that the firing of the Kennedy Center seems like small potatoes. And relatively speaking, it is small potatoes. But it told me very early, and this was in the first couple of months of his tenure, it told me very early where we were going.
Yeah, it really does draw a stark line that um, yeah, certain forms of expression are not going to be tolerated. We've got, the Kennedy
Yep.
Center. We've got Voice of America, which they've shut down. We've got NPR, and, PBS, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is, in the process of going under.
Right.
There is, yeah, definitely a attack on the truth, it seems, on freedom of expression, and on just
Absolutely.
the concept of neutrality or evenness or any of that. Boy, we just saw the firing of the Bureau of Labor Statistics head because Trump didn't like the numbers, the accurate numbers that she put out.
Absolutely. And and there are a lot of other examples, and we could probably spend the whole 45 minutes just talking about those. But I've heard that they're shutting down satellites that are getting information on climate change because they don't like climate change, so they're just going to shut off the flow of information. Um, and it goes on and on and on. And one of the things that people generally are not aware of is, or maybe they've moved on, but there's been a general purge, and it's continuing a purge in the military and in uh, the information systems in the government. They're getting rid of people that aren't going to give them the answer they want, and that is extremely dangerous. I mean, we went to war in Iraq because of faulty intelligence, and
Mhm.
it in leadership you have to accept different inputs from different people and hear things that you don't like, and you need to weigh them, and it may lead you in a direction that you don't want to go or you don't want to believe in, but the data is the data. And we're he's surrounding himself with yes men, and he's going to get the answers that he wants when he wants to start a war or invade or attack, or he's going to be told that there's justification, and he's going to be able to push that forward. But the voice of dissent and the voice of reason is not going to be there.
Yeah, you really hit at something there. Talking about the Bush administration and the war in Iraq, and it's I'm old enough to remember um, all of that and the lead up to that war, and seeing then how fishy things were, and it amazes me that here we are, 20 odd years later, and we nostalgic for that kind of corruption. Like, oh, that seems like small beans now.
Well, and I'm not a big fan of Bush, but in fact, it wasn't. I don't think that it was corruption that caused that bad decision making. It was people kind of groupthink and surrounding
Mm,
yourself with people that think like you, and a suppression in the process of and in the system of ideas that conflict. I remember when they were talking about when Colin Powell went in and said that they were making tubes that had real tight internal tolerances, and the only thing that it could be used for is centrifuges. And I heard that, and I thought it was kind of funny because the place I was working at the time made cylinders with an inside diameter plus minus 1/10,000th of an inch, which is kind of the precision that they were talking about. And I guarantee you,
yeah.
those were not going into centrifuges; they were going into door closures and pneumatic systems. So, it even me in Indiana, at the time I had no security clearance and I had no military background, they were saying things that were just clearly untrue, and nobody raised their hand and said, "Hey, no, that's not right." And that's where we're going to be going forward in this country, in a lot of areas.
Yeah. I hope that folks now are realizing that some of the, I guess, crumbs that led us here were there the whole time. And the unitary executive theory, which Trump is now taking to its logical extreme, those folks were in place then. The
Yeah.
Bush administration, especially the Cheney part of that administration, but then their Supreme Court picks, the Alitos and the Roberts, who are still there and still making important decisions. Those guys were always down for this, and they talked about it then. And I remember it coming up then, and people thought, "Oh, that can't happen here," and here we are. It's happening.
Yeah. Um, and that's one of the things, a lot of people are fixating on Trump, and I get that. But it's not just Trump. There is a whole um, uh, group of people in the United States government and supporting them that believes that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Trump's approval ratings have been steadily dropping. And the last number I saw, he's at like 42%. But if you look at 33% of the people in the country, they think he's doing a fabulous job.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that he's doing, they think is great. So, and that's kind of scary. One of the things we just went through the 4th of July recently, and only about a third of people in the United States wanted democracy in 1776. And one third of them wanted a strong leader or a king, and a third of them were sitting on the sidelines and not engaging. And things were bad enough that we actually, in 1776, we went to Canada and asked them to join us. And they weren't any more interested then than they are now. And we are right back where we started in democracy.
That third and third uh, dynamic that you bring up is something we've talked about here before, and I'm thinking of it. I don't know who the person is who said it, and I will fact check myself when I put up the show
Okay.
notes. But referring to the German population, that Americans are finding out now what the Germans found out in the 30s, that a third of your population will kill another third of your population while the other third looks on. And
Yes.
yeah, so I do think that in a way is kind of the human condition, right? That you have maybe a third of the population, a quarter to a third has sort of authoritarian tendencies. It's innate, maybe it's the way we were raised. I don't know. I'm sure we probably need more research on that. But and then another third of the population are uh, more open-minded, more welcoming, more they will fight for the stranger. Um,
Right.
and then you've got another third that are like, as long as it doesn't affect me, right? And then those people are the ones that you have to persuade, you know.
Well, and yes, and I'll tell you that much to my embarrassment, there was a brief period of time, a couple of months, that I was that one third, right? So when I said I went to my wife and said I just have to keep my
Mm-hmm.
head down and do my job, excuse me, and it would have been really easy for me as a middle class white heterosexual with a fairly conservative haircut to just stay on the sidelines and watch all this happen. And it, I it took me a couple of months to say this is really beyond the pale and I have to step up. And for me, there's two things. I like to talk with my hands, and since it's out of the field, I'll put my hands up a little bit. But um, the struggle for me, I disagree with a lot of the policies, almost all the policies, and the way they're implementing it. But the real risk is not a policy debate, right? I didn't get into this race because I think that tariffs should be at 2% instead of 20%. I got into this because they are going to destroy our democracy. They're not looking for more power; they're looking for absolute.
you know, um, there's a couple things in there that I sort of want to hit on, and Number one, right? We're only talking about a quarter to a third of the population. So that, I guess, is encouraging. This is a small minority, and I think the rest of us oppose what the Trump administration is doing. You hinted at this that you were kind of that middle third there. And number one, thank you for gradually coming over to this side and seeing it, because authoritarians count on a good chunk of the people being like, that's dangerous. I don't want any part of this. I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to close the door and just do what you're going to do. Leave me alone. And yeah, it is very important to find the folks like that and say, look, this is for real. We need you here. They might leave you alone for now, but eventually that knock comes on your door.
Well,
Go ahead.
The problem is, sorry, the problem is that if you don't stand up, you end up over in the corner praying that they will eat you last, right? You have to stand up early, not late.
Yeah, and now but here I think is where we run into a problem, right? Because we said the authoritarian mindset; those folks are a small minority. The rest of us total probably outnumber them 2-1. But because of things like gerrymandering, which is in the news this week, with the Texas Republicans trying to steal 5 seats there, JD Vance visiting us here in Indiana, maybe trying to squeeze another 1 or 2 Republican seats out of the Hoosier state here, through map making trickery. They can change the rules of the game such that their third has outsized power, right? So our district here, Indiana's 9th, Erin Houchin, I want to say she won 2 years ago, something like 70-30 or 65-35. It was not close. That's because this district is gerrymandered to lean Republican. So I guess I'm going to go there with you. How are you going to overcome that initial hurdle? Congresswoman Houchin is starting with a huge head start, not just because she's the incumbent, not just because she's got a ton of billionaire money, but also because the rules of the game have been rigged to favor her. How do you overcome that?
Well, I think it's actually worse than what you described, right? And we have to look at things honestly. So there is clearly 1/3 of the population in the United States that fully supports Trump, right? But the middle third in the United States right now is not neutral. They are, at least in Indiana, 1/3 is okay with everything that Trump is doing, and 1/3 is is okay with what they're doing, out of self-interest, or they just stay home, right? That they've removed themselves from the political process. So in the last election in the 9th district, we got beat 2-1. And if you look at the statewide, both of our senators are Republicans, right? So I think that it's more than that. And some people are looking at this saying, well, we need to move toward the Republican positions. We need to be Republican light. We need to reach out to the Republicans. We need to find common ground with them. And I think that that's a good impulse, but based on the last election, I don't think it's going to work. The fact is, if you look at what Tim Peck did in his campaign, I think it was an honorable effort to reach out as I think, right side of the party, saying, I can reach out and I'm Republican light, and maybe we can get rid of some of this craziness and still get your fairly conservative views. And I think they listened politely to him, and then they voted for a Republican. And the fact is that when Democrats try to talk like Republicans and try to be more like Republicans, then you've given those voters a choice between a Republican that talks like a Republican or a Democrat that talks like a Republican, and there's no reason to vote for the Democrats. And you talked earlier about trying to suss out where I am on the spectrum of the Democratic Party, and I am left of center. And I think that we need to stand up for what our principles are, and we need to attract people to our basic principles of fairness and community and equality and that we've got good arguments. We've got the facts behind us. We've got compassion behind us, and and we've got, frankly, self-interest behind us, because the the far right, that third, is looking for absolute power, and they're not looking
Mhm.
for a brighter future or a stronger future for us as a nation. They're looking for more power for themselves. And you also asked how, what chance do I have of winning? What is my strategy to win? And frankly, you have to be an optimist to run as a Democrat in Southern Indiana. There's no question about that. But I'm in favor of universal health care. And frankly, 2/3 of the population or more are in favor of universal health care. And it's not even close. And it's clear that these policies are popular everywhere except in Washington, D.C., right?
Mhm.
Um, and the economic policies, one of the reasons that we got beat is while we were talking about things that the Republicans wanted us to talk about, the Republicans were talking about things that people wanted them to talk about. I talked to a young man in one of the county fairs, I can't remember which one, and we talked at some length, and he said, I believe in this, and I believe in this, and I believe in this. And it was all Democratic. And he said, but I voted for Trump because he said that we weren't going to get taxed on overtime. And I've got to eat. Right. And and there's a lot of people like that they're voting their pocketbooks, and they're being told that these policies are going to be good for them. These policies are not going to be good for them. They're going to, every time people like this get in power, it's like they've got a car and they take out the steering wheel and they take out the brake and they take out all the safety equipment, and they say, all we have is the gas and we're going to go really fast. And we do. And it heats up the economy, and then they drive us into a ditch and we wreck. Right? That's exactly what happened in 2008, and it's happened over and over and over again. And that boom and bust mentality is not. It doesn't profit working class and middle class people. It only profits the investors and the upper class.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And well, that I think is where a lot of Democrats run into a problem, because we are at a financial disadvantage, right? That's the ground we're starting from. So you say, as your average Democrat, oh shit, I'm at a financial disadvantage. Money. So then you have to start talking to donors. And if you want to talk to donors with a lot of money, you have to maybe compromise your values to talk about economic issues in a way that will not scare them, you know? So you don't talk about taxing the billionaires. You don't talk about universal health care, because that threatens the insurance system, you know, middle class thing. A lot of folks have theirs. They're like, well, I don't want to lose that. It's just holding on to what you got, right?
Right?
And then there's also, you said all these positions are popular on the left, or the left position
Yeah.
is popular, like we talked about, universal health care, abortion, gun control, you name it. You pick the position, and generally the left position is popular, like 2-1, like 70-30. It's by
Yep.
a lot.
Right.
And so, yeah, the Republicans win through trickery, like the gerrymandering, which we've talked about, but also through voter suppression. And that, I think, is a big one. You ask people, yes, I want progressive policy, and
Hmm.
then they don't vote either
Right.
because Democrats aren't speaking to progressive policy. They're speaking to a, down the road, center, middle of the road, vaguely conservative policy. Or, these folks can't vote at all because there have been too many hurdles placed in their way by years and years of Republican shenanigans. Yeah.
Right.
So that is a huge hurdle to overcome for you now.
Right.
How do we dig out of that? I mean, obviously, you're going to have your work cut out for you.
Absolutely.
So what's your strategy for overcoming those hurdles? I guess.
So I've started early in my campaign, just going through policy. I've been reaching out to people like Dr. Rob Stone, who is an advocate for universal health care. I'm reaching out to some economists to talk about, what are the economic positions, and one of the things. So, for example, Bernie Sanders was very popular in Indiana, right?
Yes, he was.
But when he didn't get the nomination, a lot of people just stayed home, and so I think that these economic messages and these really common sense messages that are built on community instead of division really are popular, and we're going to have to stand up for those positions, and we're going to have to attract people to those positions. One of the things that I did, so I've only been doing this for 3 or 4 months at this point, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm still getting my business cards, and I'm getting my standard flyer and my standard speech, and and working through all this. And I just convinced within the last 30 days Facebook that I was not a bot. So I'm working on all of these things, right? And you know, one of the things that I've done, I just ordered the second set run of business cards, and I put Democratic candidate because people are afraid or too timid about being a Democrat, and I think we need to stand up and say, look, you can clearly see in your newspaper and in your pocketbook what's going on right now, and I'm not going to hide from the brand of being a Democrat.
Yeah, it's well. There's a lot there. Our brand is, I think, toxic right now. It needs to be remade. Like, as unpopular as Trump is, right? The
Mhm.
Democratic Party is even more unpopular, and it's because, yeah, obviously Republicans hate us, but half of the Democratic base also hates the party because we've been so inept, I think, for so long. And you speak to Senator Sanders and how popular he was, not just here in Indiana, but with lots of folks all over the country, and people that wound up voting for Trump were Sanders supporters before the
Yep.
general, precisely because he talked about going big, making fundamental systemic changes to our system, and Trump also talked about going big and making fundamental changes to our system. But, his method is more blow everything up, and Sanders' method is more I have a plan. Here are some other places that are doing things this way. Let's get there. Right. And what's
Right.
happened is Democrats, in many ways, the establishment of the party, the center of the party, we've become conservative in a way we've almost had to preserve what institutions we have. But I think for a lot of folks, we see it going back to 2008 and before, the system as it is hasn't been working for folks. They see the need for fundamental change. And there's there's different paths to get there. A third, right? Well, a third want fundamental
Right.
change in a progressive way. A third want to blow everything up. And a third are like, no, no, this is fine. We just have to get back to normal. And I feel like that's kind of been the message from the Democratic center for a lot of years, at least since, maybe the middle of Obama's first term, when they got backlash to from the Tea Party, which was completely manufactured, but it was talked about a lot. Yeah, and Democrats, I think,
Right.
have gotten put on a back foot since that time, and have been afraid
Well,
to go big.
one of the things that so because it's been fair season, I've been going to all of the fairs, and as I've been going through the district, one of the things that I found really interesting, and I remember back, I think maybe it was the earlier mid '90s, you'd go to a relatively small town, and there were enormous numbers of buildings that were just boarded up downtown,
Yeah.
right? And the thing that impresses me right now is the occupancy rate in small towns for shops is relatively high. And and if you look back at what the party was doing in the '60s, we stimulated the war on poverty, and the war on poverty has been wildly successful,
Yeah.
both in the United States and and across the world. When the war on poverty started, 50% of the people in the world were living in abject poverty, and now I think it's down to like 10% are in abject poverty worldwide. And many of the people that we were trying to help as Democrats in the '60s, they've moved into the middle class, and now we're in a situation where, as things are maturing, people and you see this just generally in people, like when they're young and they're hungry and they have nothing, um, they are up for change and they are pushing forward and they are evolving our systems. But then when they get to the middle class, and especially as they get older, they become more conservative and less swashbuckling in their general views, and they want to protect what they have. So it's not about gaining; it's about protecting. Right? They're not playing offense; they're playing defense. And I think the Republican Party has been trying to speak to the people that want to play defense instead of playing offense. And right now, we're getting to the point that the Republican policies and to put it more pointed, the MAGA policies are really starting to come into place and being put in place, and we're beginning to see what that really means. And and it's laying bare that universal health care is in the best interest of everybody, right? And it's not just the people that are uninsured, it's the people that are insured. The fact is that I can't remember what the number is, but an extremely high percentage of the people that are carrying medical debt actually have health insurance, right?
Yeah.
So this is not just a problem that the poor have; it's a problem the middle class are facing too. And the economic policies are are more and more constraining and funneling wealth and control and power into more and more concentrated situations. And a lot of the people that are emotionally wanting to play defense and say,
Hmm.
well, I'm in the middle class and I want to protect what I have, 100% understand that, and we need to be responsive to that. But many of those people also have children and grandchildren, and they're starting to get really worried that their children and grandchildren won't have the same opportunities that they did. So some of it is what do I need to protect? What can I protect for me? But part of what me is that my children and grandchildren can thrive. And these policies aren't going to allow that to happen. There's a number called social mobility, and that
Mhm.
is what is the probability if you are in the middle class that your children will be able to become part of the upper middle class? And that social mobility number is lower in the United States than it is in Europe. So if you want to get the American dream, you're more likely to get it in Europe than you are in the United States. And that's because of these policies that um, are not serving us well.
There's so much there, and you hinted at it. You're talking about social mobility. I wrote it down here. Like social mobility, that is the American dream. And then you said it. Like, yeah, the American dream is dead, dying, on life support. You could see for 40, 50 years now, we've been chipping away at it. Just in historical context, you mentioned it, democratic policies, the New Deal policies, built the biggest middle class to ever exist, right? Something like 65% of Americans were middle class in 1980. And yeah, you can see why those folks, then want to protect what they have. The problem is these Republican policies, the neoliberalism that Reagan and Bush brought in as an economic system, wound up shrinking the middle class. So there's less people in that class to then advocate for those policies, and you see as generations age, as that middle class has gotten older and started to die off, yeah, their kids aren't filling it, and we're down at like 45% of Americans are now middle class. That is a huge decrease, and we're at that point now, I think, and that's why things are so chaotic the last decade, is that neoliberal consensus that Republicans brought in and Democrats basically wound up acceding to under Clinton and others. Um, that era has come to an end. It has failed. We saw, I think, in 2008, that system essentially collapsed, and it's been held together with duct tape, bubble gum since then. Um, and we're figuring out what the next system is. Republicans have their sort of neo feudal, neo fascist ideas. They know where they're driving. Democrats, I think, largely haven't known where we want to go, what our vision is. We've talked about what we're not, but not what we are. Does that
Agreed.
work?
So one of the things that Democrats. So when I was a kid, I was raised in a Republican household, and so I was a young Republican and voted for Bush Senior. And what turned me toward the Democratic Party is that Democrats are always reaching forward, trying to perfect our democracy, trying to make things better, trying to reach toward a future that doesn't exist yet. And Republicans, as conservatives, are reaching back to a time that never was, right? And and you can see that this is no longer working. One of the facts that I find interesting, when my father was graduating from high school, the odds that he was going to have a better future than his parents did was about 80%. And when I graduated high school, the odds that I was going to be better off, and this is measuring from when people are 30 years old. So when my dad graduated high school, when it was 75 to 80% likely that he was going to be better off at 30 than his parents were when they were 30, right? So when I graduated high school, the odds of me being better off than my parents when I was 30 was about 65%. For my children, who are 24 and 33, um, when they graduated high school, the odds of them being better off than their parents were was down to about 50%, right? So it's a coin flip whether you're going to be better off than your parents or not, and that so that upward trajectory, and again, it comes back to this. That's another measure related to social mobility, is stalling out, and and the policies that we have to put in place have to address that. And while the Republicans say we're getting ripped off, I shouldn't say the Republicans. I'm going to be more specific. MAGA says that we're getting ripped off by foreigners. We're getting ripped off by our trading partners. The fact is, we are 4% of the world's population and 33% of the world's wealth. We are not getting ripped off by trading partners. The theft and the unfairness happens inside our borders, not outside of our borders.
Yes, and it is specifically the billionaire class who is doing all of the theft. They are maybe not okay, maybe not theft, but they're hoarding wealth. I generally I subscribe to like modern monetary theory, and I believe the government's job when managing the economy is to make sure that money is moving. It's always going to come from bottom to top. If people spend, it's going to go up to the small shopkeeper, to the big shopkeeper, to the major corporation.
Mm-hmm.
Government's job is to sort of hoover it back in its direction and then spread it out and keep the money flowing. And right now, the problem with our economy is that the wealth is all stuck, in the billionaire class, and we need to take a pinata stick and whack it out of there.
Well, so practically speaking, there are three groups. Now there's a whole bunch more groups than just three, but let's try to keep it simple. There are three groups. There are the people, the government, and the wealthy and powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the wealthy and powerful have convinced us that we need to remove the government from our lives, right? We need to, and I can't tell you how many people I've heard over the years say, I just want to get the government off my back, right? And and there's too much regulation and too many rules. And yeah, sometimes there is burdensome regulation, and that should be addressed. But the fact is that this is like sharks telling swimmers that they need to take down the shark barricades so they can swim free. They're not doing this because it's in our best interest. They're doing it because it's in their best interest, and they are going to eat us alive. Every time the rich and powerful are given free reign, they put us into a subservient condition. It becomes usury, and they drive the economy into the ditch. And the role of the government is to balance those interests. And I will say this, and maybe it's going to get me in trouble. The Republicans do have a point that it's not just the billionaires that are in this class. It is the high end earners, the people that own small businesses. There is a place for a little bit of greed. There has to be an advantage to um, to hard work and taking risks. And frankly, most of the people, even the small business owners that are making decent money, but they're not making millions and billions every year, um, by the time they actually get to that position, if they're making $400,000 a year, they feel like they've earned every freaking penny of that, because it is hard to be successful. You have to take risks, and um, and we have to encourage that. So I'm not against business. We have to make sure that is there. But what we do need to make sure of is that there's economic policies that the people can become those small business owners, right? If that's their dream. And frankly, if they want to not be a small business owner and they want to work for a company or a corporation, that they can live a comfortable life and have dignity in their life and not be used and abused. And that environment that allows that to happen is set by government policy.
Yeah.
And we have bought, as a country, we have bought into the idea that the government has no place in our lives. And what people miss is that government and government policy is intimately involved in your success and failure, whether they're engaged by regulation or whether they're engaged by not regulate or not engaged. Either one of those positions has a direct effect on people's lives. And I think we're beginning to see that pulling the government away and letting the business and wealthy rule is is pushing us back toward conditions that we spent decades trying to get beyond.
We did. It was, we were talking about the growing middle class and when it was growing, and during the New Deal consensus era there from like the 30s to the 70s, and that was government policy that lifted all those folks up. And I think, yeah, you hit at something. A lot of the people who benefited from those policies and were able to get into the middle class or upper middle class and own a piece of the American dream. The oligarchs, right? The super wealthy corporate class convinced those folks that hey, we're all buddies here. We're business buddies. We are the ownership class. Um, we're on the same side here against those freeloaders, right? Well, it turns out those folks in the middle class are still workers. They work. Um, whereas the oligarch class, they are just benefiting off of other people's work. We were never on the same side to begin with, right? And a lot of folks,
Right.
I think, feel like now when they complain about the government as some other, um, I I think the left and the right are both seeing the exact same problem, but from completely two different lenses. And then the key is going to be talking to folks and convincing them that this is what's actually happening. And it's that the government and the oligarchical class have essentially merged, right? They,
Mhm.
years and years and years of deregulation and allowing the rich to get richer and richer and richer and richer. They consolidated. There's been less regulation, less antitrust enforcement, right? So they consolidate and acquire everything they can until the only thing left to acquire is government itself. And when the right complains about the government and the left complains about corporations and billionaires, we're all complaining about the same thing because the government has been captured by corporations.
Absolutely. And there are also some other economic realities that we have to keep in mind, right? So while the middle class was growing, and you were talking about the class growing dramatically, and it did, but that was in a post World War II environment. And oh, by the way, there was significant government regulation and there were union rules. And
Mm-hmm.
so, a lot of the things that we think of now as we never did that. This is going back to the good old days that never was. I want to go back to the 60s and 70s, back before regulation. There was dramatically more regulation in the 60s and 70s of our economy, and there was a lot more direction in our economy coming from the government in the 60s and 70s. And we had the majority, we had a much stronger percentage, even than the 33% that we have now, of the world economy, because they were still trying to rebuild, and Germany is still pulling bombs out of the ground that hadn't
Yeah.
exploded. So we do live in a different world than in the 60s and 70s. And one of the problems, I was at a dinner, which will go unnamed, at a Democratic event, and they were talking about all the things that we, the Democratic Party, have done and what we're proud of. And almost everything they talked about was from the 60s and early 70s. And um, half of America's population is under 40. So all of these great gains,
Yeah.
and the Democrats have done amazing things to strengthen our democracy. Um, but the only thing we keep the strength of the Democrats is we're forward looking, but we spend a lot of time thinking about what we did in the past,
Mm.
and and we need to be worried a lot more about what the next 40 years is going to look like than what we did in the previous 40 years. And
Yeah.
economically, we are in a different situation, and we're going to have to be thoughtful about that. Our birth rates are significantly down, and if it wasn't for immigration, we'd be negative today in growth. Um, in the 60s, I mentioned the worldwide poverty, desperate poverty was like 50% of the world. It's down to 10%. Um, we are not the only major power economically in the world. China is dramatically stronger, obviously now, and also the European Union is continuing to grow together and act together economically. Um, and the real growth in the world from an economic point of view is actually happening in Africa.
Yep.
So um, I am not I am not advocating that we go backward and say, well, the democratic policies from the 60s were better and we need to go back to the 60s. Let's let the Republicans reach back to the past and try to resurrect things that never were. Um, but we need economic policies um, that help a broader portion of our people. And the thing that I'm really concerned about is, and I've been thinking a lot about this lately, if you look at the policies that are being put in place, when you talk about economics and immigration and education and democracy, they are setting up systems that put us on a glide path to a weaker economic position in the middle class. They're putting us on a glide path that young people are going to have more trouble getting into the middle class. And over the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to see, I think, real declines in our real income and our real quality of life. And we're going to look around, and a lot of people are not going to understand that they voted themselves into this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we really do need to put some forward-looking policies in place and talk about the kind of future and the kind of economy we want to build. Yeah, you're right. In doing that, we can't resurrect the New Deal. We can't keep
Right.
talking about stuff from 60 and 70 years ago, but we can bring those lessons into today and some of those general ideas about regulation and uh, spreading the wealth out more fairly. We can bring
Absolutely.
those forward in today. Like we don't need to reinvent the wheel in that regard, and we don't need to stifle the greed or the innovation or whatever as we put it. In order to do that, folks can go out and earn as much as they want. Maybe we just have to tax the top rate a little more. Like in many ways, it doesn't require much more than just doing.
Well, I think it requires a little bit more than that. There is a discipline, a financial discipline problem in the government, and if you look at, pardon me, if you look at the um, the deficits that are run under Democratic presidents, um, they're too high. Okay, but if you look at the deficits as a percentage that are run under Republicans, who profess that they're economic, more responsible than us, it's higher, right? So the Democrats in power spend too much money, and the Republicans spend even more, but they brag about being more responsible than us. Um, so both groups are going to have to, I guess, fit into their skinny jeans and start not overspending, because we cannot end up like Greece and Portugal and Ireland. It will eventually catch up to us. And in fact, one of the reports that you'll probably never see again, and they probably pulled it, um, the the Department of Defense listed two things as being significant risks to the future ability of the American military to defend this country, and one of them was economics, that we were not um, building some things here that we needed to, which everybody's worried about and working on now. But it was also our debt. They're that they have formulas that say, here are all the factors and description of a country, and you plug that into a formula and you compare it against the people the countries they're fighting against, and what is the probability that they will be successful. And one of them is economic strength. And that factor is dropping in the United States because of policies, both that we've talked about, and then also fiscal policy in the United States. It's leaving us vulnerable to our ability to sustain um, the Department of Defense if we are in jeopardy. Um, they also came out with a policy, or not a policy, but a review that said that global warming and climate change, I should say, climate change is a significant destabilizing effect. And I'm sure that policy, that report has been pulled. We'll never see that again. You'll probably have a heck of a time trying to Google to find that, but it was. And these are things that the government needs to be saying. We need to have people that understand these things and that can talk to policymakers. And all those people are being fired, right? I mean, they're decommissioning the satellites to tell us about global warming, so we're not even going to have the data that we need.
I'll say this about debts and deficits and the economy and everything. I think both parties have been playing the wrong game on this. According to modern monetary theory, of which I'm a big fan, I cannot recommend Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, highly enough. She advised Senator Sanders' campaign. She was his economic advisor. I want to say during the first run, maybe the second as well. The deficit is a cudgel. Republicans are really good at using it to say, well, we can't do this and this and this, and therefore we have to cut taxes, and deregulate and all those things. By playing this deficit game with the Republicans, we are playing by their rules. Federal deficits are, government deficits are private assets. So really, the issue isn't how much debt we're running. A lot of it's accounting tricks anyway. We owe most of it to ourselves. But what the real constraint is not the deficit, but our real available resources. And if we have the resources available and we can marshal them, we can afford to do anything because we can, we are the source of our own spending money as a government. Ireland, Portugal, Greece, members of the EU, they were not the source of their own spending money as members of the EU. They can't set their own monetary policy. Um, cannot recommend Kelton or any of the MMT economists enough for folks running for office. Look, Brad, I got to tell you, I could keep this conversation going for another couple hours because we've barely begun to get into your policy. We've barely scratched the surface. It's been a very high level discussion. Will you come back so we can do a deep dive on some of these things sometime?
Absolutely, I would love that. And I'll tell you that one of the things that I really would like to talk more about is immigration, because I believe
Yeah.
I believe we are at a point right now that um, we may be able to. I think there may be a grand bargain to be made in immigration, and I've got some information and my views in my website bradmeyer.org that you can take a look at on immigration. But immigration is really tightly tied with our economy, and we need, you had talked about we had talked about the Democrats tend to lead with their heart and say,
Mhm.
this is a problem of compassion, and we need to be compassionate to these people. And I think that we have gained to our side as many people as are really susceptible to that argument, right? And the Republicans tend to view, especially the MAGA, this as a legal issue that we have to keep, we have to legal legal only, that is the
Yeah.
only way they can come in. And we've been at a stalemate for 40 years on this. And I think that the middle ground is to say, both of those positions, I understand, have adherents, but the fact is that this is an economic problem. And
Yeah.
because we have not addressed this from an economic position, we have been unsuccessful for 40 years. The fact is that immigrants contribute to our society. And the fact is that the reason that people come here, and I'll use the term in air quotes, illegally, is because we make it so dang hard to come in legally, and there's jobs. The fact
Mhm.
is that if you look at the number of people, there's tens of thousands of people that get arrested for coming into the country without documentation, and the number of people that are prosecuted for illegal hiring, which is a federal felony, is like 10 a year, right?
Yeah.
So that is what is driving this. It is completely economic, and we need a new approach. And if we can get both sides out of their historical rhetorical positions and just have an honest conversation about what we as a country need and how we can do it humanely and with dignity, we so yeah, so I'd love to talk about that, which I guess I just did, and others as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like we just even if we the emotional arguments are good. People are driven, people are emotional creatures. But yeah, even if you
Yep.
if you look at it completely selfishly and in an economic numbers way, yeah, like we need to bring more people in. Like you said, our birth rate's down. Instead of the obvious solution, hey, there's a bunch of people who want to come here, and a lot of them even want to work for cheap. You know, um, we could increase our birth rate and the base of the population, and really capitalism's all a big Ponzi scheme. You just need more people at the bottom, right, to keep it going. And yeah, so we can do that, or we can force the women we already have here to birth more babies. Yeah, which route did the Republicans take? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Brad,
Yes, sir.
at least for now, that's about all the time we got. But yeah, we'll have you back. I want to go through all these things. And, but in the meantime, how can folks learn more about you and your campaign?
Well, thank you. So First of all, I have a website, and that's bradmeyer, meyer.org. And there's several places in there. And I've got the website up. It talks about policy positions that are challenges to democracy, economics, healthcare, immigration, education, the environment, and foreign policy. And on the front page, there's 2 sentences on each one of those. So if you just want to have a high level, what's his general, view on this, you can get that. And then if you click on the topic page, you can get a paragraph that summarizes. And then if you click on the expansion, it'll give you, in some cases, 3 to 7 pages of details. So I am not, and I guess this is one of the things that we've got to get past just the motherhood and apple pie feel good expressions. So, for example, healthcare, there are people that say, well, we want more affordable healthcare and more accessible healthcare. It's like, what does that really mean? That doesn't mean anything. It's feel good nothing that doesn't tell you where we're going and what the goals are. So I have 3 different levels of detail in my policies that you can reach out to, and I think that they'll get a good sense of where I'm going. I also have,
like Elizabeth Warren says, you've got a plan.
Yeah. I also have barely a Facebook page, which is Brad Meyer for Indiana. That we're just now getting off the ground and started now that they don't think I'm a bot. So that'll have some pictures and some other information as well. I will mention that my intention is to be a more activist candidate than what you're used to.
Very good, and I'll link to the website, I'll link to the Facebook, and any place else you got, so folks can access those from our show notes. But in the meantime, Brad Meyer, thank you for joining me here on the Who's Left podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Once again, that was Brad Meyer, candidate for the Democratic nomination to challenge Republican incumbent Congresswoman Erin Houchin in 2026. We barely scratched the surface, and I'll have Brad back soon in the coming weeks to dive into his platform, First Immigration. Be on the lookout for that. But for now, thanks for listening. I'll be live at 10:30 a.m. Sunday on Project Next Media Network's YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch streams, where I host Who's Left This Week, Indiana's most thorough Sunday morning news and politics talk show. Check it out live if you get a chance. It's a lot of fun, if you can call following the news in this timeline fun. I bring together a diverse group of panelists from the Democratic Socialist left to Never Trump conservatives, and we look at the week's headlines from around Indiana and beyond. We'll also take time to examine one big thing, a different deep dive every week. Hope to see you there in the comments, but if you can't make it live, the program will be available as a podcast later Sunday afternoon. Thanks again to Brad for making that leap and running for office, and for sharing his time with us. If you can, consider sharing some funds with his campaign. The Act Blue link is in the show notes. And if you're feeling extra generous, also consider sharing some funds with me via a paid subscription to whosleft.us, where you'll find my entire archive. I rely solely on the generosity of kind patrons like you to make this information available for free to everybody. In addition to the website, you can find me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads at whosleft.us, and on Facebook, X, TikTok, Mastodon, and YouTube at Who's Left. Direct message me at any of those sites with feedback, tips, ideas, and concerns, or email me at scott@whosleft.us. While you got the old email machine out, please forward the show to a friend and have them pass it on too. Let's keep building this project and a truly democratic state, one conversation at a time. Until the next one, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.